So today, we're going to dig into a really chilling psychological experiment from the 70s and then trace a direct line from its dark prison cells to the very code that, believe it or not, shapes our world today. Let's get into it.
Think about that for a second. It's a question that really gets to the core of who we are. And way back in 1971, one psychologist decided to set up an experiment to find out. And let me tell you, the results, they were way more terrifying than anyone could have ever imagined.
Okay, so our story starts in a pretty unassuming place, a basement at Stanford University. The man in charge was a psychologist named Philip Zimbardo, and he was wrestling with this massive question. What are the psychological effects of power? To find out, he built a prison. He got 24 young men, all students, all screamed to be physically and mentally healthy. And then, a simple coin toss decided their fate for the next 2 weeks. Half of them would become prisoners, the other half guards. Now this is the really crucial part. There was nothing innately different about these guys. They were just ordinary people, just like you and me. What's just wild about this timeline is the sheer speed of the breakdown. On just day 2, can you believe that? Day 2, the guards started getting authoritarian and cruel, even though they were given no specific instructions other than just maintain order. By day 4, things were completely off the rails. Prisoners were having psychological breakdowns, the guards' abuse was escalating. The whole situation just became so toxic, so dangerous, that they had to pull the plug. Yeah, it was supposed to last for 2 full weeks. It didn't even make it through 1. The power of the situation, the power of the roles they were playing, it just completely steamrolled their individual personalities. It was a really stark lesson in how much our context, our environment, can shape how we behave. But the Stanford prison experiment, it wasn't happening in some kind of vacuum. Back in the 1970s, this whole idea of engineering human behavior was a massive focus in psychology, and that was largely thanks to one incredibly influential figure. Let's talk about B.F. Skinner. He was the father of what he called operant conditioning. He basically believed that our behavior isn't really the result of free will, but it's just a response to feedback from our environment. The idea was, if you could carefully control the rewards and punishments, this whole system of reinforcement, you could shape the behavior of any animal, and that included us humans. So here, you can really see 2 totally different models of control. On one side, you have Zimbardo's prison. It's direct, it's physical, and it's all contained within one basement. But on the other side, you've got Skinner's vision, which was, honestly, way more ambitious. He imagined a system of behavioral engineering that could be scaled up to shape entire populations, not through force, but through subtle, systematic reinforcement. That vision of a scalable, engineered control, it must have sounded like pure science fiction back then. But guess what? It's not sci-fi anymore. It has become the reality of our digital world. The scholar Shoshana Zuboff has a name for this new economic logic. She calls it surveillance capitalism. Okay, so it all starts with this thing called behavioral surplus. Think about it this way. When you use a free service online, yeah, you provide the data needed to make that service work, but you're also giving away all this extra data. It's like the digital exhaust from your life. Your clicks, how long you hesitate on a page, your location, all that surplus is the raw material for this new system. And the process of turning your life into that raw material, it's called rendition. It is literally the translation of your human experience into data points that a machine can feed on. Your joy, your anger, your friendships, all of it is being rendered into signals for a system to analyze. And this is where it gets really chilling. As Zuboff writes, the same kind of logic that was once used to track animal populations in the wild is now being applied to us. In a way, we're being observed and tracked in our new natural habitat, the digital world. So if this is all happening, how does it actually work? It's not magic, right? It's a system. And to really get it, we all kind of need to become more data literate. So let's break this whole thing down layer by layer. First off, and this is huge, you got to understand that a data set isn't objective truth. It is not reality. It's a snapshot, a really filtered view. The people who built it made choices, what to measure, who to include, what to ignore. So for instance, if a crime data set only tracks street-level arrests, but totally ignores things like corporate fraud, it's not giving you a neutral picture of reality, it's actually making an argument. Every dataset has a point of view, and if you can't see it, you can't really question its conclusions. All right, next up, a classic mistake, confusing correlation with causation. You've probably heard this one.
As ice cream sales go up, so do drowning incidents. So does eating ice cream cause drowning? No, of course not. The real cause, that hidden variable, is hot weather. People swim more and they eat more ice cream. Our digital systems are masters at finding these correlations on a massive scale, but they often get the why completely wrong, which can lead to some really flawed or even dangerous assumptions.
So what do these systems do with all this data? Well, they build prediction models. But here's the catch. A model isn't a crystal ball. It's more like a past projector. It just uses all this historical data to guess what's going to happen next, and it does that by assuming the future will look pretty much like the past. And hey, that works until it doesn't. Just think of the financial models before the 2008 crash. They were great at predicting a stable market because that's all they'd ever seen. They were catastrophically wrong when something totally new happened.
And that leads us straight to bias. Let's be super clear about this. Machine learning bias is not a political complaint. It is just math. It's a mathematical certainty. If your historical data reflects societal bias, like, say, a hiring data set that overwhelmingly favored men for tech jobs, any model you train on that data will learn to replicate that exact same bias. It will systematically, mathematically produce unfair results. It's garbage in, garbage out. The machine is just reflecting the flaws we fed it.
And finally, we hit the optimization trap. This one is, well, it's pretty scary. An algorithm does exactly what you tell it to do with terrifying efficiency. So if you tell a social media algorithm that its only goal is to maximize engagement, it's going to learn really fast that outrage, conflict, and even misinformation are incredibly engaging. The model doesn't care if it's harming people or spreading lies, it's simply achieving its goal. It's a perfect servant with absolutely no moral compass.
So, okay, when you take a step back and put all these layers together, from a fake prison in a university basement all the way to this global system of behavioral reinforcement, it forces you to ask a really profound question.
This was B.F. Skinner's core belief, and it's summed up in this one pretty chilling sentence. He argued that our feeling of free will is just an illusion. We don't really make independent choices, we just respond to the vortex of stimuli in our environment. And today, that vortex is being engineered with a precision and on a scale that Skinner himself could only have dreamed of.
So we're left with this. Are we now living in a massive digital version of that Stanford prison, being nudged into roles by invisible forces we don't even understand? To find a way out, the first step isn't rebellion, it's literacy. We have to learn to decode the very science that is, right now, constantly trying to decode us.